All right, today we got a bike in for service from our retail center. The customer is complaining of the fork feeling a little harsh off of the top. These Ohlins forks come with a spacer pre-installed in the negative air chamber. So today we're going to try removing that, seeing if that gets the feel that the customer is after with the fork. And while we're at it, we're also going to do a standard 50-hour leg service as well. Refresh the oil in there and make sure that the seals are all good to go. So here we go. Ohlins use a pinch bolt on the lowers. So you have to loosen that guy up first before removing the axle. Go ahead and remove the caliper off of the fork. I like to take a rubber band, put it around our hardware, keep it all together for us while we're servicing the fork. And take our stem and headset off. I have an old steer tube I like to put in bikes. Work on, keep the handlebars in place. Go ahead and remove all of our small bolts. They don't use a damper cartridge. The entire upper leg is a volume or a column of oil. The other unique thing about them is the air cartridge, which we're going to be messing with here in a second. Instead of an air spring that a lot of fork manufacturers like to use, they use a standalone air cartridge. Makes it really easy to service the air cartridge. It's really good for racing programs. It allows them to have several tuned cartridges on the fly that they can change out in between race runs, and they don't have to actually drop the lower legs to do that. So that's one of the reasons they've adopted to go to that. Second, it gives them full control of tunability, having a positive and a negative air chamber, and then being able to tune the volume of those two chambers really gives the fork a lot of tuning options on that side. So since it's a cartridge, the air is contained within that cartridge. Since we have a cartridge on either side, we don't have to thread anything in to remove the lowers. You can see they're ready to just come on off. So we'll go ahead and drop our lowers. There you can see our lower leg fluid. Okay, now we have access to the air cartridge. So we'll remove the top cap here. That's going to give us access to the tooling there to go ahead and remove that cartridge. Looks like it uses a standard RockShox or Shimano lock ring type tool. And here is our air cartridge. Go ahead and clean the oil off of it real quick. Now we can prep it to open up and see what's going on in there. So before we deflate them, I'll take note of what the customer has set as their air pressure, both the positive and the negative chamber, so we can return it to there. I'll probably put a recommendation that they reevaluate their sag after doing this, since it will change pretty drastically how the fork feels and behaves. So we got 95 in the top. In the bottom, we are at 187 PSI. take out both of our valve cores, make sure we got no air trapped in either chamber. There's likely going to be a little bit of air trapped in the third chamber here in the middle. We'll be able to have a better view of how the 3 chambers work, but essentially the way it works is the low pressure chamber right here sits in this area, has higher volume, lower pressure. So that's what we set at. Then we have a ramp up chamber, and it sits in this lower portion of the air chamber here. In between the two is a piston, and that piston is responsible for switching to the third chamber. Once we have this opened up, I can show it in motion. Ohlins also has some great videos online showing how that third chamber opens up during fork travel. There's our piston that's responsible for switching or keeping the upper and lower portion. Cool, so we're gonna go ahead and remove this piston really quick. That'll give us access to this negative air volume spacer. All right, so in here, you can now clearly see the negative air volume spacer. It's the white Delrin guy in there. So this is what we're going to be removing to increase the amount of volume in the negative air chamber. And that is going to hopefully give the customer the more supple feel that they're after with the fork. Take some assembly grease and make sure that our O-rings all have a nice coating on them. This assembly grease dissolves in the presence of mineral oil, which we use in the suspension, so it will only be there as we assemble this back together. And we're not looking to go crazy tight here, we're just looking to bottom out the O-ring that is on the bottom of this piston. Have the thread locker do the job of retaining it. All right, so you can see that's sliding real nice and smoothly. Before we install the upper portion of it back together, I'll go ahead and lubricate our piston there. That's the guy, remember, responsible for separating the 2 halves. Between these 2 O-rings and this hole is where the piston is allowed to switch in between the chambers there and give it its third chamber that Ohlins talks about. So as we put that together, you can see the piston moves up and down past that, and as this blue piece comes over the top of those 2, it closes off, making a third chamber right there. There is our freshly serviced air cartridge with the negative volume spacer removed. We're ready to go ahead and install this back in the fork, return it to the pressures that the rider had it at, and see if this is what he was looking for. Pop out these foam rings and check them out. You can see they're doing their job and catching all of the dirt that comes into the fork past those. We're going to go ahead and clean out those foam rings before we reinstall them. Just making sure that the foam ring is seated all the way around inside of the gland there. Now we can hydrate our seals. A lot of people think that the stanchions are sliding on the wiper seal, but the wiper seal is doing what its name is. It's wiping the stanchion each time it goes past the seal and scraping any dirt that may be there. If we get dirt in between the bushing here and the stanchion, that's when we can actually get adverse performance, stanchion damage, anything like that. So we're really trying to make sure that anything from that foam ring down is as clean as possible, and that's going to give the fork the best performance and also prevent any damage from any of the components. So at this point, we are ready to slide our lower legs back on. Good rule for these Ohlins forks is typically whatever pressure we're putting in the top here, we would put roughly double in the bottom. And then I will be putting a note in there for the rider to reevaluate their sag and riding pressures before going on their first ride. All right, so we removed the negative volume spacer out of the air cartridge here, gave the fork a basic 50 hour. We're gonna go ahead and equalize the air chambers now by cycling the fork a couple times, see how it feels. Everything's feeling pretty good. I think we're ready to go ahead and take this back down to the store. And if there's any other adjustments or work they want done on the fork, we'll go from there.